November 7th, 1943. Rechlin-Lärz Airfield, 70 miles north of Berlin. Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche adjusted his parachute harness and stared at the massive American fighter parked before him, with bright yellow undersides gleaming in weak autumn sunlight. The Republic P-47D Thunderbolt, designated T9 plus FK, looked grotesquely oversized compared to the graceful Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf fighters he knew intimately. Its enormous cowling housed a radial engine bigger than anything he had flown. The cockpit sat so far back that the entire aircraft seemed unbalanced. German intelligence officers had measured it at 17,500 pounds fully loaded, more than twice the weight of a Bf-109G. Lerche, principal test pilot at the Luftwaffe's Chief Flight Evaluation Center, had flown over 120 different aircraft types without damaging a single machine. He held no illusions about American engineering, yet the briefing notes in his hand contained warnings that contradicted 4 years of aerial combat experience. Do not engage this aircraft in head-on attacks. Firepower concentration forward exceeds any fighter in Luftwaffe service. Pilot survival in direct frontal engagement assessed as minimal. Another line, underlined twice in red pencil by an intelligence analyst, stated simply, "This machine should not fly." Yet, it dominates at altitude through brute force. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The path that brought this particular Thunderbolt to Rechlin began hours earlier over France. Second Lieutenant William E. Roach of the 358th Fighter Squadron, 355th Fighter Group, had taken off from Steeple Morden, England as spare aircraft for a bomber escort mission. When another pilot developed engine trouble, Roach formed up with Yellow Flight. The mission proceeded normally until Roach encountered navigation difficulties in thick weather. Flying through clouds that obscured all landmarks, relying on compass headings grown uncertain from turbulence and compass deviation, Roach made a decision that would alter Luftwaffe tactical doctrine. Spotting what he believed was an airfield in southern England through a break in the weather, he committed to landing. The approach looked correct. The runway appeared adequate. He followed ground vehicles to parking positions and shut down the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine. Only when German soldiers surrounded his aircraft with weapons drawn did Roach understand his catastrophic navigation error. He had landed at Rechlin-Lärz Airfield, near Caen, France, a Luftwaffe fighter base deep in occupied territory. The Germans could scarcely believe their fortune. Intelligence officers had studied grainy reconnaissance photographs of Thunderbolts operating from English bases. They possessed combat reports describing the American fighters' characteristics. They had interrogated captured pilots. But here, taxiing intact toward them with full fuel and ammunition, came the first complete and flyable P-47 Thunderbolt ever to fall into German hands. Roach himself would spend the remainder of the war in Stalag Luft first. His aircraft, christened Beetle by its original crew, would begin a far different journey. German ground crews immediately stripped American markings and replaced them with Luftwaffe Balkenkreuz crosses and identification codes. The aircraft received bright yellow paint on its entire undersurface, tail, and wingtips, the standard warning colors used on captured Allied aircraft to prevent friendly anti-aircraft units from destroying them during test flights. The designation T9 plus FK identified it as property of a unit most frontline Luftwaffe pilots would come to know well, the Wanderzirkus Rosarius, Theodor Ted Rosarius, a Flugkapitän commanding the 2nd. Staffel of the Versuchsverband Oberbefehlshaber der Luftwaffe, the trials and research unit of the Luftwaffe High Command, had been tasked with a mission critical to Germany's increasingly desperate air defense. Form a traveling demonstration unit of captured Allied fighters. Test each aircraft thoroughly. Then, tour frontline units, familiarizing German pilots with enemy capabilities, weaknesses, and, most importantly, tactics to counter them. The unit bore the Geschwaderkennung T9 that would mark every captured aircraft Rosarius commanded. Understanding why German pilots needed this education requires understanding what they faced in the autumn of 1943. The strategic air campaign against Germany had intensified to levels that strained Luftwaffe defensive capabilities. American heavy bombers crossed into German airspace in formations numbering hundreds of aircraft. Escorting these bombers came fighters that represented engineering philosophies completely alien to German tactical doctrine. The Thunderbolt exemplified this alien approach. From the moment Beetle arrived at Rechlin, German engineers and pilots recognized they confronted something that contradicted every principle of fighter design, refined through 4 years of continuous combat. Weight was the enemy. German doctrine emphasized this truth absolutely. Maneuverability came from lightweight airframes. Turn performance determined victory. Every kilogram added to a fighter reduced its combat effectiveness. The Messerschmitt Bf-109G weighed 6,940 pounds. The Focke-Wulf 190A series weighed 8,770 pounds. These were precision instruments, carefully balanced machines, optimized for the turning combat that characterized fighter engagements from Spain through North Africa to Russia. The P-47D weighed 17,500 pounds. Fully loaded, this single-engine fighter outweighed many twin-engine bombers. The engineering team that first examined Beetle at Rechlin filed reports that circulated to Luftwaffe High Command with barely concealed bewilderment. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double-wasp engine alone weighed 2,360 pounds more than the empty weight of many pre-war fighters. This 18-cylinder radial monster produced 2,000 horsepower at military power, with water methanol injection allowing emergency boosts to 2,300 horsepower. The engine was air-cooled, eliminating the vulnerable liquid cooling systems that made German inline engines susceptible to single hits. It featured 2 rows of 9 cylinders each, rotating in opposite directions to eliminate torque effects. German engineers marveled at the sophistication, while understanding they lacked the metallurgical capacity to produce similar power plants. Behind the engine lay the aircraft's defining technological feature, the General Electric turbocharger system that gave the Thunderbolt performance at high altitude where German fighters struggled. This system, occupying nearly half the fuselage length, used exhaust gases to drive a turbine spinning at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute. The turbine compressed incoming air, maintaining sea-level pressure at 30,000 feet, allowing the engine to produce full power where thinner atmosphere normally strangled performance. An intercooler then reduced compressed air temperature before it entered the engine, further improving efficiency. The entire system operated automatically, freeing pilots from constant engine management. German attempts to develop equivalent turbocharger technology had foundered repeatedly. The system required metallurgy, capable of withstanding extreme thermal cycling, precision manufacturing tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, and control mechanisms reliable across temperatures ranging from -40 to +400 degrees Fahrenheit. Germany possessed the theoretical knowledge. They lacked the industrial capacity and exotic materials needed for mass production. The armament made German evaluators physically step back from the aircraft. 8 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing. Each weapon fired 800 rounds per minute. Total rate of fire exceeded 100 rounds per second. The Germans calculated that a 1-second burst sent over 100 rounds at the target. Each projectile weighed half an ounce and struck with 12,000 foot-pounds of energy. German pilots reported that P-47 fire didn't just damage aircraft, it literally tore them apart in mid-air. One combat report from a survivor of a Thunderbolt attack stated, "I watched a Messerschmitt disintegrate, one moment flying, next moment scattered pieces." The American fired perhaps 2 seconds. The psychological impact of such firepower concentration exceeded its material effect. German pilots trained to deliver precise bursts aimed at vulnerable points found their marksmanship negated by an aircraft designed to absorb punishment. American pilots needed only approximate aim. The sheer volume of fire guaranteed hits. and hits from 50 caliber guns firing armor-piercing incendiary rounds meant catastrophic damage even to heavily armored aircraft. Lerche's first flight in the Thunderbolt, carefully documented in his logbook preserved in German military archives, revealed characteristics that would reshape Luftwaffe tactical recommendations. The cockpit baffled him initially. Controls positioned differently from German fighters, instruments marked in English with peculiar American abbreviations, levers whose functions remained mysterious. The flap control system proved particularly confusing. Hydraulically actuated with built-in compensation for uneven deployment between wings, the mechanism operated through linkages Lerche couldn't immediately decipher. He decided to test flaps at safe altitude, deploying them incrementally to gauge their behavior under load. He noted with appreciation that Americans had marked instruments with red and green sections, indicating acceptable operating ranges, a concession to the reality that P-47 seconds were flown by pilots of varying language backgrounds and experience levels. The thoughtfulness of this design choice impressed him. The roominess of the cockpit surprised him pleasantly. German fighters packed pilots into cramped spaces to minimize frontal area. The Thunderbolt provided space to move, adjust position, reach controls without contortions. Tall pilots who couldn't fit comfortably in BF 109 seconds would find the P-47 accommodating. The sliding canopy opened easily even at moderate speeds, providing excellent ventilation. Climate control in this American fighter exceeded anything in German service. Starting the R-2800 required procedures different from German engines. The massive radial coughed, backfired, sent smoke billowing, then settled into a deep rumble that Lerche felt through his seat. The sound differed completely from the high-pitched whine of Daimler-Benz or Junkers inline engines. This was a thundering bass note, mechanical and raw, announcing power through visceral vibration. Taxiing proved difficult. The long nose completely obscured forward visibility on the ground. Lerche had to zigzag, looking out side panels to avoid obstacles. Ground crews guided him with hand signals. This characteristic alone would have disqualified the design in German service, where efficient ground operations mattered critically at crowded airfields under attack. The takeoff run surprised him. Despite the aircraft's massive weight, acceleration proved adequate. The Thunderbolt lifted off smoothly, climbing away with power that belied its bulk. Lerche tested basic handling, finding the controls heavier than German fighters but well harmonized. The aircraft felt solid, planted, resistant to turbulence. Small control inputs produced measured responses. Large inputs he experimented cautiously, generated surprisingly rapid rolls. At speed, the P-47's roll rate exceeded expectation. This would prove significant in combat, where rolling away from attacks mattered more than sustained turn performance. He climbed to altitude to test the turbocharger system's effectiveness. At 15,000 feet, power remained strong. At 20,000 feet, the R-2800 pulled smoothly, no reduction in performance. At 25,000 feet, where German fighters struggled to maintain energy, the Thunderbolt actually felt more responsive. At 30,000 feet, where Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs gasped for air, the P-47 remained powerful, controllable, ready for combat. Lerche pushed into a dive, curious about reports claiming the Thunderbolt achieved speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. The aircraft accelerated rapidly. Controls remained effective. No buffeting. No structural complaints. The airspeed indicator climbed past 400, past 450, approaching 500 miles per hour. At these speeds, German fighters encountered compressibility effects that locked controls and threatened structural failure. The Thunderbolt's thick wing and robust airframe handled the velocity with ease. Lerche pulled out of the dive, the aircraft climbing back to altitude with energy preserved. This zoom climb capability explained combat reports describing Thunderbolts escaping German attacks simply by diving away, then climbing back above their pursuers. German fighters diving after Thunderbolts reached structural limits around 470 miles per hour. The American aircraft continued accelerating beyond that speed, opening distance that made pursuit futile. The test flight lasted 45 minutes. Lerche landed with a new respect for American engineering philosophy. The aircraft wasn't elegant. It wasn't refined. It was brutally effective. A machine designed around overwhelming power rather than delicate balance. German fighters were racing bicycles, light, responsive, requiring skilled handling. The Thunderbolt was a motorcycle-heavy, powerful, forgiving of errors, capable of performances racing bicycles couldn't match through sheer mechanical advantage. His report, submitted to Luftwaffe High Command, contained assessments that would prove prophetic. The P-47 represents a fundamentally different approach to fighter design. Where we optimize for maneuverability, the Americans optimize for survivability and firepower. Where we reduce weight, they add durability. Where we refine handling, they maximize power. The result is an aircraft that cannot be defeated through tactics developed against European fighters. New approaches are required. Rechlin's test program expanded as engineers conducted systematic evaluations. They measured the P-47's performance across its entire flight envelope. Climb rate, adequate below 15,000 feet, excellent above 20,000 feet, superior above 25,000 feet. Top speed, 433 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. Dive speed, over 550 miles per hour before structural limits. Service ceiling, 43,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach operationally. Turn radius, inferior to German fighters at all speeds. Roll rate, competitive at low speeds, superior at high speeds. The Americans had designed an aircraft that fought vertically rather than horizontally. German doctrine emphasized turning combat in the horizontal plane. The Thunderbolt's strengths lay in vertical maneuvers, diving attacks, zoom climbs, altitude advantage, exploitation. This vertical fighting style rendered traditional German tactics ineffective. German engineers examined the structural design with particular interest. The fuselage was massively overbuilt by German standards. Primary structure consisted of bulkheads and longerons, dimensioned far beyond calculated stress. Requirements. This over-engineering added weight, but provided margins that allowed the aircraft to survive battle damage that would destroy lighter airframes. The wings attached through massive forgings capable of handling loads from violent maneuvers or heavy weapon impacts. Control surfaces featured metal construction throughout, no fabric covering that could be shredded by gunfire. The landing gear, designed to support the aircraft's extreme weight, featured such robust construction that rough field operations presented no concerns. Self-sealing fuel tanks incorporated multiple layers of rubber and mesh that sealed bullet holes automatically, preventing fuel loss and reducing fire risk. German fighters used similar technology, but American implementation proved more effective, with thicker sealing layers and better internal tank design. The armor protection astonished German evaluators. Thick plates shielded the pilot from behind and below. The massive radial engine served as additional frontal armor. Head-on attacks, the preferred German tactic, meant shooting through hundreds of pounds of engine block before reaching the pilot. Combat reports confirmed that P-47 pilots rarely died from frontal attacks. The engine absorbed punishment and kept running, or served as final protection even when damaged. This realization led to the warning Lerche had read before his first flight. Do not engage this aircraft in head-on attacks. German doctrine since the Spanish Civil War emphasized frontal approaches. Attacking from ahead minimized exposure to defensive fire. Closing speeds in head-on passes exceeded relative velocities in tail chases. German fighters mounted heavy cannon firing through the propeller hub, concentrating firepower directly ahead. Against British and Soviet fighters, this tactic proved devastatingly effective. Against the Thunderbolt, it was suicide. The American aircraft's 8 wing-mounted machine guns created a cone of fire several feet wide. German fighters attacking head-on flew directly into this barrage. The P-47 pilot needed only approximate aim. The volume of fire guaranteed hits, and the Thunderbolt's armor and structure meant return fire from German cannons, while damaging, often failed to achieve kills. German pilots initiating head-on attacks against Thunderbolts died. American pilots making the same attacks survived, protected by engine mass and armor plate. Luftwaffe tactical bulletins began circulating new guidance. Avoid frontal engagements with P-47 aircraft. Attack from angles deflecting fire concentration. Never pursue in dives. Do not climb away, the enemy possesses superior altitude performance. Recommended approach. Attack from above and behind. Deliver burst. Immediately break away before enemy can return fire. These recommendations revealed the tactical bind facing German fighter pilots. Traditional attacks from ahead. Suicide. Attacks from behind required getting behind an aircraft that dived faster than German fighters could follow. Attacks from above, feasible, but the Thunderbolt's excellent high-altitude performance meant gaining altitude advantage proved difficult. Attacks from below exposed the attacker to 8 machine guns firing downward, while the German pilot fought against gravity to maintain firing position. The Thunderbolt had no weak attack angle. Every approach carried risks that experienced German pilots recognized as potentially fatal. More Thunderbolts arrived at Rechlin as the war progressed. A second P-47 captured when Second Lieutenant Lloyd Hathcock became disoriented during a mission on May 29, 1944, landed at an airfield near Rome. This aircraft, serial number 42-75971, had been the personal mount of 8 Victory ace George Novotny. It quickly joined the Wonder Zirkus Rosarius, designated T9 plus LK. Multiple German pilots flew these captured Thunderbolts. Walter Wolfram, an experienced fighter pilot with significant combat time, tested the P-47 and provided assessments that circulated through Luftwaffe squadrons. "I didn't like the Thunderbolt," Wolfram recalled after the war. "It was too big. The cockpit was immense and unfamiliar. Everything felt wrong compared to our fighters." But Wolfram acknowledged grudgingly, "In the air, it performed differently than expected. The Americans built it to exploit strengths we don't value. Power over agility, durability over lightness. At high altitude, it dominated. In dives, nothing we flew could match it. The firepower was terrifying." Kurt Buligan, a high-scoring ace with 112 victories, encountered Thunderbolts repeatedly in combat and later flew captured examples. His assessment proved brutally honest. The P-47 was very heavy, too heavy for some maneuvers. We would see it coming from behind, pull up fast, and the P-47 couldn't follow. We came around and got on its tail this way. But Buligan added critical context. This worked when we fought single aircraft or small formations. When they appeared in numbers, our tactics failed. While engaging one, others attacked from different angles. The Americans learned to fight as teams, not as individuals. The Zirkus Rosarius began touring frontline units in early 1944, bringing captured Thunderbolts, Mustangs, Spitfires, and other Allied fighters to operational airfields. German pilots gathered to observe demonstrations, ask questions, and sometimes fly the enemy aircraft themselves. These sessions provided critical intelligence about Allied capabilities, but they also delivered demoralizing messages about the strategic situation. One pilot recalled a Rosarius visit to his unit in the spring of 1944. The demonstration day arrived. We saw P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-38 Lightnings alongside our own aircraft. The site itself was surreal enemy machines peacefully parked beside, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. Formation leaders were given opportunities to fly these machines in mock combat, learning their characteristics firsthand. This experience proved invaluable, but watching the demonstrations also revealed uncomfortable truths. The Americans had built superior aircraft and produced them in numbers we couldn't match. The intelligence briefings accompanying Rosarius visits emphasized specific tactical guidance about the Thunderbolt. Do not engage P-47 aircraft in head-on attacks. Their firepower concentration forward exceeds defensive capabilities of German fighters. Survival rates in frontal engagements approach 0. Do not pursue P-47 aircraft in dives. Their structural strength and dive speed exceed capabilities of Bf-109 and Fw-190 fighters. Pursuit will result in structural failure of German aircraft before overtaking enemy. Do not attempt sustained climbing engagements above 25,000 feet. P-47 turbocharger provides superior altitude performance. German fighters will lose energy and become vulnerable. The list of do nots grew longer with each tactical bulletin. Avoid this. Don't attempt that. Never try the other. German pilots, trained aggressively, found themselves hedged by restrictions born from harsh combat experience. Every restriction represented dead pilots whose tactics had failed. Part 2 continues. The warnings radioed from pilots who had flown captured Thunderbolts carried weight that no intelligence briefing could match. These weren't analysts speculating from reconnaissance photographs. These were experienced fighter pilots who had sat in the American cockpit, felt the R-2800's power, experienced the aircraft's capabilities firsthand. Their messages reached frontline units with urgency born from understanding what German fighter pilots faced. Unteroffizier Kurt Scherer of the 2nd Staffel, Jagdgeschwader 4, attended a Circus Rosarius demonstration at his unit's airfield in late 1944. The event began with a formation flyby featuring captured Allied fighters. P-51 Mustangs gleamed in natural metal finish with bright yellow tails. P-47 Thunderbolts rumbled past with their distinctive engine note. P-38 Lightnings, their twin-boom configuration unmistakable, completed the display. German pilots watched silently as enemy aircraft performed maneuvers over their own base. The afternoon session featured a P-47 demonstration by an experienced test pilot. The Thunderbolt climbed to altitude, then dove at what appeared to be terminal velocity. The sound built gradually a distant rumble, growing to thunder as the massive fighter accelerated downward. Scherer estimated the dive speed exceeded 500 miles per hour. The aircraft pulled out of the dive smoothly, zooming back to altitude without apparent effort. Our instructors explained that pursuing this maneuver in German fighters would result in structural failure, Scherer recalled decades later. The Thunderbolt's wing could sustain loads our aircraft couldn't tolerate. This single demonstration proved more valuable than hours of classroom instruction. The briefing that followed addressed the question every German pilot wanted answered. How do we defeat this aircraft? The instructor, a major with extensive combat experience, provided answers no one wanted to hear. The P-47 cannot be defeated through traditional tactics. It does not fight like European fighters. It refuses turning combat where our advantages lie. It exploits vertical maneuvers where our disadvantages become critical. The only reliable method for engaging Thunderbolts requires perfect tactical positioning. You must attack from above with altitude and energy advantage. Deliver a single high-speed pass. Achieve hits or miss entirely. Immediately break away. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt pursuit if the enemy dives. Do not attempt climbing after them if they zoom climb. Do not engage frontally under any conditions. Your survival depends on accepting these limitations. Scherer remembered the atmosphere in the briefing room. We understood that we were being told how to survive, rather than how to win. The Americans had built an aircraft that negated our tactical doctrine. Our fighters remained capable machines, but capability meant nothing against opponents who refused to fight on our terms. The demonstration concluded with a sobering statistical summary. Since P-47 operations began over Europe in the spring of 1943, Luftwaffe fighter losses in the West have increased by 40%. American fighters claim thousands of our aircraft destroyed. We cannot replace these losses. Pilot training has been reduced from 400 hours to 150 hours due to fuel shortages. New pilots face experienced American pilots flying superior aircraft. The mathematics of this situation are clear. We are losing the air war. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The frontline experiences of German pilots who encountered Thunderbolts validated every warning the Circus Rosarius provided. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, commander of Jagdgeschwader 1, led his unit against American bomber formations on October 8, 1943. Philipp had flown over 500 combat missions, earned every decoration the Luftwaffe could bestow, and destroyed 206 enemy aircraft. He was among the most experienced fighter pilots in German service. The mission proceeded normally until Philipp's formation encountered P-47 escorts at 25,000 feet above Bremen. The Thunderbolts dove from altitude with characteristic aggression. Philipp executed the defensive maneuver that had saved him countless times, a sharp climbing turn that German fighters performed superbly. At lower altitudes, this tactic worked reliably. Attacking fighters couldn't match the climb rate and fell away, giving Philipp's formation time to reposition. At 25,000 feet, the Thunderbolts followed the climb effortlessly. Their turbocharged engines produced full power where Philipp's Focke-Wulf 190 struggled against thinning air. The Americans stayed with him through the vertical maneuver, firing continuously. Philipp's last radio transmission, received by his wingman Feldwebel Hans-Georg Reinhardt at 15:45 hours, consisted of 2 words: Reinhardt, attack. Minutes later, Philipp's FW-190A6 disappeared into clouds at 15,000 feet, trailing smoke from 50 caliber hits. The veteran ace managed to bail out at extremely low altitude. His parachute failed to open fully. Germany's 7th highest scoring ace died from an encounter with an aircraft type his experience and skill couldn't overcome. 2nd Lieutenant Robert Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group's 61st Fighter Squadron, who may have delivered the fatal burst, wrote in his after-action report a phrase that captured the growing realization spreading through the Wehrmacht. Aircraft exploded, no parachute observed. If Philipp cannot survive against the Jug, no one can. The loss of experienced aces to Thunderbolt attacks devastated Luftwaffe combat effectiveness more than raw numbers suggested. These men represented decades of accumulated tactical knowledge. They trained new pilots, led formations, made split-second decisions that determined mission outcomes. Their deaths created leadership voids that poorly trained replacements couldn't fill. Major Heinz Baer, eventual 220 victory ace, encountered Thunderbolts over Frankfurt in November 1943 while leading an interception against B-17 formations. His unit executed textbook attacks from altitude, diving through the bomber formation to deliver cannon fire before climbing away. The tactics had worked successfully against unescorted bombers for 2 years. P-47 escorts appeared during the climb-away phase, catching Baer's formation at its most vulnerable moment. Low on energy from the climbing turn, German fighters couldn't accelerate or maneuver effectively. The Thunderbolts dove through them with devastating results. Baer watched as aircraft exploded around him, 50 caliber fire literally tearing fighters apart in mid-air. His own aircraft sustained multiple hits but continued flying, a testament to the FW-190's robust construction. 5 fighters from his formation failed to return. 0 bombers were shot down. The mathematics were unsustainable. Baer's combat report filed after the mission described the tactical impossibility German pilots faced. We cannot dive with them, they are faster. We cannot climb with them, they have superior altitude performance. We cannot run from them, they possess better speed at all altitudes above 15,000 feet. If we turn, they disengage and attack when we're vulnerable. Our only advantage is turn performance, which they refuse to contest. This is not air combat as we understand it. This is systematic execution. The firepower differential became a source of particular psychological trauma. German fighters typically mounted 1 30mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. The Bf-109G carried this armament. Some FW-190 variants mounted 4 20mm cannons and two 13mm machine guns. These weapons delivered tremendous destructive force per hit. A single 30mm shell could destroy an aircraft. But German pilots had perhaps 5 seconds of firing time before exhausting their ammunition. The slow rate of fire meant brief engagements had to achieve decisive results. The Thunderbolt's 850 caliber machine guns could fire continuously for 20 seconds. Rate of fire exceeded 100 rounds per second. German pilots calculated that in the time required to aim and fire a 1-second burst from German weapons, a Thunderbolt delivered 100 projectiles. The Americans didn't need precision. Volume of fire compensated for less than perfect aim, and 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds, while smaller than German cannon shells, proved devastatingly effective. They penetrated armor plate, ignited fuel tanks, destroyed engine blocks, shredded control surfaces. The cumulative effect of multiple hits from sustained fire exceeded the damage from single cannon shell impacts. Lieutenant Walter Schuck, eventual 206 Victory Ace, shot a P-47 with his 30mm cannon over Frankfurt. I observed strikes on the cowling, wing root, and fuselage. Any German fighter would have exploded or gone down immediately. The American aircraft shuddered, maintained flight, then dove away at full power. I pursued for 3 minutes before abandoning the chase. It was still flying when I lost visual contact. American damage reports discovered in archives after the war showed that Schuck's target had sustained 37 hits from 20mm and 30mm cannon fire. The aircraft returned safely to England with all major systems functioning. The pilot reported the incident as moderate battle damage. This resilience broke German pilot morale more effectively than any propaganda campaign. Scoring hits meant nothing if targets didn't go down. The head-on attack warning that originated from Rechlin test flights proved tragically accurate in combat. German tactical doctrine emphasized frontal approaches since the Spanish Civil War. Attacking from ahead minimized exposure time, maximized closing speed, allowed concentration of cannon fire through the propeller hub. Against Hurricanes, Spitfires, P-42s, and Soviet fighters, this tactic achieved excellent results. Against Thunderbolts, it produced casualty rates that forced tactical revisions. Hauptmann Johannes Naumann led his Schwarm in a head-on attack against a phase of V5 formation of P-47 seconds, escorting bombers near Schweinfurt in October 1943. The Americans didn't break formation as expected. They flew directly at the attacking Germans, 8 machine guns per aircraft firing continuously. The combined firepower from 4 Thunderbolts created a wall of projectiles several yards wide. Naumann's Schwarm flew into this barrage at combined closing speeds exceeding 700 miles per hour. 2 German fighters exploded instantly, torn apart by concentrated fire. Naumann's aircraft sustained catastrophic damage to the engine and forward fuselage. He managed to bail out, severely wounded from fragments that penetrated the cockpit. His wingman's aircraft disintegrated completely, no parachute observed. The 4 Thunderbolts continued escorting bombers without apparent damage. Post-mission inspection revealed moderate battle damage to 1 aircraft. The other 3 reported no hits. This pattern repeated across dozens of engagements. German fighters attacking P-47 seconds head-on died. American pilots making similar attacks survived, protected by massive engine blocks and armor plate. The tactical bulletin distributed after Schweinfurt was unambiguous. Frontal attacks against P-47 aircraft are prohibited effective immediately. Pilots disobeying this order will be held responsible for losses resulting from tactical errors. The prohibition represented more than tactical adjustment. It acknowledged that German fighter doctrine, refined through years of combat, had encountered an opponent against which traditional methods failed. The psychological impact extended beyond individual pilots to affect overall Luftwaffe combat effectiveness. Pilots trained aggressively, encouraged to press attacks until achieving decisive results, now received orders to avoid engagement under most conditions. The cognitive dissonance between training and operational reality created hesitation that American pilots exploited ruthlessly. Johannes Steinhoff, eventual 176 Victory Ace and post-war Luftwaffe commander, analyzed American tactical superiority in a 1946 interview conducted by Allied intelligence officers. The Americans fought as a system, not as individuals. Radio discipline, standardized procedures, mutual support. Their pilots were good, their aircraft were excellent, but their system was unbeatable. German fighter pilots operated with significant autonomy. Squadron leaders made tactical decisions based on immediate circumstances. We valued individual initiative and personal combat skill. This approach worked when we fought opponents of similar capability. Against the Americans, it proved disastrous. They coordinated attacks through ground controllers, flew standardized formations that covered mutual blind spots, executed practiced maneuvers that maximized their aircraft's strengths while minimizing weaknesses. We fought as skilled individuals. They fought as a machine. The machine won. The industrial implications of Thunderbolt operations became apparent to German commanders who understood strategic mathematics. Republic Aviation built 15,683 Thunderbolts between 1941 and 1945. Peak production exceeded 600 aircraft monthly. This single fighter type represented more production than Germany's entire output of all fighter types during comparable periods. Every P-47 destroyed was replaced within days. Every German fighter destroyed represented an irreplaceable loss. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commander of German fighter forces, examined captured P-47 specifications and production figures in late 1943. His assessment, preserved in post-war memoirs, revealed the strategic hopelessness facing Germany. We understood that America possessed industrial capacity exceeding our own, but seeing these numbers made abstract concepts concrete. They built fighters faster than we could destroy them. They trained pilots faster than we could kill them. They supplied consumables, fuel, ammunition, spare parts in quantities we couldn't match. The Thunderbolt represented not just a capable aircraft, but an entire industrial system we had no possibility of defeating. The cumulative effect of Thunderbolt operations manifested in statistics that told the story of German aerial defeat. In the 6 months following June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe lost approximately 2,800 fighters in the West. P-47 groups claimed roughly 1,000 of these victories. The 56th Fighter Group alone destroyed 674 German aircraft during the war, becoming the top-scoring American fighter group in Europe. These losses translated into irreplaceable pilots. By mid-1944, average Luftwaffe pilot training had dropped to 150 hours compared to 400 hours in 1941 and over 700 hours for American pilots. German rookies flying obsolescent fighters faced American veterans in superior aircraft. The result was systematic slaughter that no amount of courage could overcome. Lieutenant Heinz Noak's diary entries from the spring of 1944 documented the psychological collapse of German fighter forces. April 8, 1944. Lost 3 pilots today to Thunderbolts. They were experienced men with over 100 combat missions each. The Americans didn't even slow down. They delivered attacks and continued escorting bombers as if we were targets of opportunity rather than serious threats. April 22, 1944. 5 more pilots gone. We shot down 1 American. He bailed out safely and will probably be flying again within weeks after repatriation or escape. Our pilots are dead. We don't have parachutes that deploy reliably at low altitude. We can't bail out from damaged aircraft that other pilots would survive. The disparity in survival rates exceeds the disparity in aircraft performance. May 3, 1944. I don't know how much longer I can continue. Every mission costs us pilots we cannot replace. Training standards have collapsed. New pilots arrive with 50 hours of flight time and minimal gunnery training. They face Americans with hundreds of hours and extensive combat experience. The mathematics are clear. We're losing the air war. The Thunderbolt sound, that deep rumble of radial engines, has become the sound of our defeat. The ground attack capability that Thunderbolts demonstrated from late 1943 onward added another dimension to German demoralization. P-47 seconds that had just finished destroying Luftwaffe fighters would proceed to strafe trains, trucks, tanks, and airfields. The massive radial engine served as armor protecting pilots from ground fire. The robust airframe tolerated battle damage that would destroy lighter fighters. The heavy armament could destroy locomotives with single passes. Unteroffizier Karl Fuchs, a tank commander who survived the Normandy campaign, described a P-47 attack on his column in June 1944. 8 of them came out of clouds with bombs and rockets. One pass destroyed 9 vehicles and killed approximately 30 men. They returned with machine guns and destroyed 6 additional vehicles. The entire attack lasted 3 minutes. We were completely helpless. Anti-aircraft fire appeared ineffective. They flew through flak that should have destroyed them and continued attacking. The sound of Thunderbolt engines became integrated into the daily experience of German forces during 1944. Soldiers on the Western Front heard that distinctive rumble whenever Allied aircraft operated, which meant nearly constantly after D-Day. The acoustic signature created psychological effects, transcending tactical considerations. The sound became associated with German powerlessness, constant reminder that they faced enemies whose resources appeared infinite. Hauptmann Werner Mulders, commanding a frontline fighter unit in France during the summer of 1944, filed reports describing the impossibility of protecting ground forces from air attack. We maintain fighter cover over our own airfields. The Americans send 4 aircraft. 2 engage our fighters. 2 attack the airfield, destroy parked aircraft, damage runways. By the time we disengage, they're gone. This happens daily. We cannot prevent it. The Thunderbolt's combination of performance, durability, and firepower makes interception nearly impossible. The final indignity came during Operation Bodenplatte on January 1, 1945. The Luftwaffe launched nearly 900 fighters against Allied airfields in a desperate attempt to regain air superiority. German pilots destroyed approximately 150 Allied aircraft on the ground, but the Luftwaffe lost 237 aircraft and 214 pilots, including 18 formation leaders and senior commanders. P-47 groups played crucial roles in defeating this operation. The 56th Fighter Group intercepted German formations returning from attacks, destroying over 30 aircraft in a single day. Germany had gambled remaining strength on one massive strike. They lost the gamble. The Thunderbolts they encountered demonstrated capabilities that rendered German sacrifice meaningless. The Americans replaced their losses within weeks. Germany never recovered. Major Heinz Baer, one of the few Luftwaffe aces to survive the war, reflected on the P-47's impact in a 1948 interview. The Thunderbolt represented everything we weren't. We built refined machines requiring skilled pilots. They built a brute that average pilots could fly effectively. We emphasized elegance and maneuverability. They emphasized power and durability. History proved them right. We lost not because our pilots lacked courage or skill, but because we faced an enemy whose industrial capacity rendered courage insufficient. The human stories behind these statistics provided the most compelling evidence of the Thunderbolt's impact. German pilots who survived carried memories of an aircraft they couldn't defeat, designed by an enemy they had catastrophically underestimated. The hatred wasn't personal. German pilots respected their opponents as fellow aviators. The hatred was professional, directed at an aircraft that nullified German tactical doctrine, survived damage that should have been lethal, and appeared in numbers that made victory impossible. Hans-Werner Lerche, the test pilot who first flew captured Thunderbolt T-9 plus FK at Rechlin, survived the war and continued his aviation career. In a 1977 memoir, he reflected on his experiences testing Allied aircraft. The P-47 impressed me more than any other captured type, not because it was beautiful, it wasn't. Not because it handled elegantly, it didn't. but because it embodied a philosophy completely different from ours. The Americans understood that in industrial warfare, survivability matters more than perfection. That adequate performance, produced in quantity, defeats superior performance produced in limited numbers. That pilot survival ensures experienced crews return for subsequent missions. Flying the Thunderbolt taught me that we had approached fighter design from incorrect assumptions. We believed lightness equaled superiority. The Americans proved that power overcomes weight disadvantages. We believed maneuverability determined victory. They proved that refusing to fight on opponents' terms negates maneuverability advantages. We believed elegant solutions represented optimal engineering. They proved that robust, simple designs produced reliably outperform sophisticated designs produced inconsistently. The Zircus Rosarius continued operations until Germany's collapse in May 1945. The captured Thunderbolts toured airfields throughout the Reich, demonstrating capabilities that frontline pilots needed to understand. But these demonstrations increasingly served to reveal the hopelessness of Germany's strategic situation rather than providing useful tactical information. By early 1945, Luftwaffe pilots understood they faced overwhelming odds. The Thunderbolt sound became synonymous with inevitable defeat. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The legacy of German evaluation of captured Thunderbolts extended beyond World War II to influence post-war aviation development. The lessons German pilots learned about American design philosophy, prioritizing durability, firepower, and power over elegance and lightness, shaped how surviving Luftwaffe personnel approached aviation after the war. Many became consultants to NATO air forces, bringing perspectives informed by having flown both German and American fighters under combat conditions. The warnings about head-on attacks, about pursuing Thunderbolts in dives, about engaging at high altitude, these tactical lessons entered military aviation doctrine worldwide. The recognition that fighters need not excel in every performance category to dominate combat influenced designs ranging from the F-4 Phantom to the F-15 Eagle. The Thunderbolt's philosophy of overwhelming capability in critical areas, while accepting limitations in less important characteristics, became fundamental to American fighter development. For German pilots who survived the war, the P-47 remained a source of respect mixed with bitter acknowledgement. They had flown courageously in inferior aircraft against overwhelming opposition. Those who survived carried memories of an aircraft they couldn't defeat, of warnings radioed from test pilots who had flown captured examples, of tactical bulletins prohibiting attacks that had killed experienced pilots. The sound of Thunderbolt engines, which had terrorized German forces for 2 years, became in memory the acoustic signature of lessons learned through catastrophic defeat. The captured Thunderbolts tested at Rechlin, demonstrated by the Zircus Rosarius, and analyzed by Germany's best pilots revealed truths that contradicted years of fighter development doctrine. Weight wasn't inherently disadvantageous. Maneuverability wasn't paramount. Elegance didn't equal effectiveness. The Americans had built something that defied conventional wisdom and used it to dominate European skies through brute force, industrial capacity, and tactical systems that German individual skill couldn't overcome. The radio warnings from German pilots who had flown captured P-47 seconds, "Do not engage Thunderbolts in head-on attacks," represented more than tactical guidance. They acknowledged that aerial warfare had fundamentally changed, that the romantic era of individual combat between skilled pilots in agile fighters had ended. That modern war between industrial powers would be decided by production capacity, systematic organization, and machines designed for survivability rather than elegance. The Thunderbolt embodied this new reality, and German pilots who recognized that reality understood their defeat was inevitable, regardless of personal courage or tactical brilliance.